As you go through the education program, you're going to talk about standards often in your courses. We'll talk about them a little bit in this class just in terms of our assignments. We need to have something that will guide us as we're deciding what we're going to do for each of the assignments. For example, this time we're going to create a virtual field trip. Well, what should our virtual field trip be based on? Where should we go? That all should be determined by what you think you want to teach, the grade, and the content areas. So if you want to teach elementary school, then you have a variety of content areas that you could choose from. If you want to teach high school social studies, then you would choose from topics within that. So what I want you to do first is think about, what do I want to teach? And it's okay if you're not quite sure, because it's still the beginning of the program. So narrow it down as much as you can. If I know I want to teach elementary, but I'm not sure what grade, then maybe I'll look at the standards for the different grades, and this time I'll just choose something that interests me. And then maybe next time I'll choose something from a different grade until I kind of get a feel of what's taught in the different grades, and that might help me decide where I want to be. There's no guarantee that you'll be teaching there, because you'll probably choose the grade that has the job. But it's nice to see what's taught in different grades. It's also important because even if you know for sure you want to be a second grade teacher, you've got to know what the students learn in first grade and even kindergarten, what they're going to learn in third grade, because in second grade you need to know what they should have learned prior to coming to you, or what you're going to have to review or maybe fill in the gaps. And then you need to know what they need to know when they go to third grade, because you have to prepare them for that. Or you might have students who are higher learners, and you need to pull from the third grade standards to challenge them. So it's really important to have an awareness of what's taught in each grade. You don't have to memorize standards. Many teachers who've been teaching for a long time could probably spout off a number of a standard, because they have to teach that standard every year. But that's not required of you, even as an experienced teacher. What you have to know how to do is access the standards and read them and decide, how am I going to develop a lesson that fits with that? And that's something you'll really start to do when you take your instructional design course, which is EDUC 330 if you're an undergrad and 530 if you're an MAT. So that's to come. Right now we just want to look at the standards and decide, okay, what would be something that is taught in my grade that would fit with a virtual field trip? So to do that, I can go to resources in our class and go to the folder called Standards. In this folder, I've put several standards. Some of them are just our technology standards, and that's what these nets are for. Now they're called ISTE standards, but it's the link to the same standards. So we're not going to pay attention to those right now, or 21st century skills, any of those. The standards that we're going to pay attention to right now are these standards: the Common Core, math, science, social studies, and so forth. I pulled out math, even though it is part of Common Core, just because it might be easier for you to see this way. Common Core are the standards that are for math and for English language arts. So if you think that you specifically want to teach those content areas, then you might want to explore the Common Core standards. Science and social studies are under what we call the North Carolina Essential Standards. So I think that there's a misconception that Common Core means all standards, and that's not true. They only address math and then in language arts. And then when you get into high school, some of the language arts, there are some social studies within that too. But the main social studies standards are going to be under essential. So I need to think, well, what do I want to teach? Well, we're going to travel somewhere. I want to teach elementary school, for example, and I'm thinking something in social studies because I like social studies. So I'm going to click on the standards, and it's going to take me to the North Carolina DPI site, and this is where they have our essential standards listed. And the social studies standards, you can see if you look down this list, are broken into first grade level. And then when you get to upper secondary social studies, it's broken into content area. So world history, American history, African American studies, psychology. So some of those would be electives in high school. So I'm going to go to the elementary social studies because that's what I'm interested in teaching, and I see grades K2, I see grades K3, 5. So if I click on K2, I'm going to get a document that's going to talk to me about the standards in K2 social studies. So the way I read this is I'll see this black section at the top, and it says history. So it's broken up in different domains. All of the social studies standards in elementary grades usually are broken up into history, civics and government, economics, culture, geography. I think those are most of them. So they'll be broken up into those domains, and then within those you'll have the standards. So if we look right here, this first standard says KH1, which means kindergarten, history, and it's the first standard. Understand change over time, so that's the standard. And then there are some additional, more specific objectives that fall under the standard. When you teach a lesson, you could teach to this bigger standard, or you could be more specific that you're hitting these particular objectives. It might be one lesson for KH11. And again, I said earlier, you don't have to memorize all this. You just have to know how to find it and look for it. So, for example, explain how seasons change over time. So, within change over time, one of the things that we have to learn is about the seasons. So, those are examples of content of what the student should be able to do. So it doesn't tell me how to teach it, and I think that's a misconception too about standards, that they're learning that new math. Well, if you look at the math standards, the Common Core math standards are like this. It's the what the students should learn, and then the teacher has to determine, well, how are they going to learn that? So the one thing that is encouraged is teaching in different methods, and I think that's where we get that new math idea, is that they're approaching it in different ways than we might have learned. But same with the social studies standards. It doesn't really tell us how to teach it. It just says that the student should be able to explain how seasons change over time. So that's what they have to do. Now I have to determine how are they going to do that. So one way we're going to do something like this is we're going to do a virtual field trip that they're going to go on, and they're going to learn, be able to learn this standard. So you have to go through the standards and decide what would be appropriate to do with a virtual field trip. One that's like a Google tour where they're traveling to different places around the world. So here's one I see for kindergarten. Identify physical features such as mountains, hills, rivers, lakes, roads, etc. So that's specific to maps. I could see using a Google tour to travel to different places, perhaps locally or within the state, where they could see those things. So let's travel to the mountains, and let's zoom down in the Google tour and look around and see what they look like. Let's travel to a river. Let's zoom down in the Google tour, look around, see what it looks like. And then each stop they would have a question or two. So that's how I would use the standards. I would look through and see, okay, what do I want to teach? What is taught in that grade? And then what would work with a virtual field trip? First grade, you can see when we get to first grade, we're looking at neighborhoods and communities. So I don't know that you could do the change over time with the neighborhoods, but you could possibly do geography with the neighborhoods, and you could do the roles of authority figures. So they could travel to where the mayor is. They could travel perhaps to the police chief, so the different places within the community. Going back to this change over time, I actually could see you doing something like this one, how explain how neighborhoods and communities change over time. For example, if you're in Winston-Salem, you could have students travel to different places within Winston-Salem, and that would be how it currently looks. And then in the Google Tour feature, where there's the ability to add a picture, you could put a picture of what it used to look like. And you could have them talk about, well, how is it different now? And why do you think it's different? So I'll talk more about that when I do the Google Tour video. So again, you're looking through the standards and you're trying to decide what would fit. So if I go to science, same idea. Maybe I'll go to middle school this time. It gives me the standards, so there's the domain across the top, forces in motion, which is one that appears in almost every grade, but the level of complexity is deeper. So while force in motion you'll see starting in kindergarten, it's a more surface level of looking at force in motion, and now we're in 6th grade and we've built on that knowledge, and it's much deeper than it was in kindergarten. So I see 6, I see physical science, and I see 1 as being the first standard. I see what the standard is, and then I can see more specific objectives that can be pulled from that standard. So that's how you read those. If I go to Common Core, I can go to where it says read the standards, and I can choose English, language arts, or math. So if I choose English, language arts, these are organized a little bit differently than the essential. I see kindergarten through grade 12. And then they have them in categories that they've created, like reading literature, reading informational text, reading foundational skills, writing. So for example, if I click on reading literature, now I can see the different grades. So maybe I choose 9, 10, and I come over here, and I can read the standard the same way. So Common Core, State Standards, English, Language Arts, Literacy, and RL is reading literature. I look at that again. 9 through 10, and then this is the first standard. So that's what all those things mean. And then it says cite strong and thorough textual evidence and so forth. So that tells us what the student should be able to do. So we have to decide how are we going to teach so that the student can be able to do that. Now with the Google Tour, something like this may be more difficult to do with a tour. So what a lot of my English people do is they'll pick a piece of literature that they think would be read in those grades, and they'll travel to the different places within the book for the students to experience. And maybe they experience it prior to reading the book, so it's kind of a way to build background knowledge, or they experience it while they're reading the book, or it's an extension. So now that we've read Number of the Stars or Night, if we're looking at Holocaust time period, now let's travel in Europe to the different places that were discussed in the book. So you get a better idea of where we are in relation to where we live. So that might be something that you do if you're thinking secondary English. You could still pull from the standards in the sense that you, as they're reading and answering questions in the virtual field trip, they can do things like cite strong and thorough textual evidence to support, so you can address the standard through your questioning. So I just wanted, and I know this ended up not being quick, but I wanted to give you an overview of what the standards are, how you find them, and how you think about them in terms of the virtual field trip. So to wrap it all up again, you're really thinking about this as a way to guide you. So I don't want to make a virtual field trip that has nothing to do with what I plan to teach. I want to make one that I could actually use. So if I want to teach anatomy, for example, I had a student last fall who was a lateral entry teacher, and he taught anatomy. So he decided to create his virtual field trip kind of Miss Frizzle style from the Magic School Bus, and he had the students go inside a human body for one of the things he did. Now, that was before we did Google Tour, but I just want to show you that as an example of he related it to something that he was teaching so that his students could actually do it. So if you're not teaching yet, that's your time to think, okay, what do I want to do? So you have a little more flexibility in thinking of what you could possibly do for the field trip. So let me know if you have any questions about standards. If you find one that you think you would want to use but you're not quite sure, let me know and we can talk through it and see if it actually fits.